How are you?
I'm okay.
Hey, thanks for taking the time to chat with me.
Sure.
Yeah, so we were actually just up on Saturday doing a pick as my first time seeing the distillery and going through that single barrel process. I thought that was really cool.
Good. Glad you had a good time.
Yeah, you guys are, from my experience, kind of doing a little bit differently in terms of the starting point selection of, here's tasting notes from a lot of different barrels, get it down to a smaller number, and then go from there. I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah. Well, pardon me, I'm getting over a cold, bronchitis or something.
No worries.
We did an awful lot of work in barrel picks. Perhaps you gleaned when you were here the origins of New Riff being out of retail liquor.
Yeah,
and we did an awful lot of intimate work with Kentucky's finest distilleries back when we were retailers, with barrel picks and other projects, things like that. We launched at the Party Source, for example, Four Roses private barrels for that distillery, and among other things. And so we knew well how that all works at the retail level, at the experiential level. And when we go to offer that to people in our now distillery, we wanted to do it right. We hope we do everything right, but that's kind of how we went about that. It wasn't. I hear from other groups and stores and our customers things like horror stories about where this has wound up at other institutions or distilleries. Like they go and do a tasting and they're all tasting out of a common glass. They pull it out of the barrel and pass a glass around. And
right.
Okay, I'm pretty sure you guys can afford even glassware.
Yeah.
It's just uncivilized and things like that. So we wanted to do a new riff. Frankly, we are a new riff on an old tradition. We wanted to do that right. So.
And if you don't mind, let me jump in. I just kind of start on the conversational side, but before I kind of start, do you mind if I hit record on this and it won't be played anywhere? It'll just be for my own purposes of pulling out specifics and quotes. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, sure, not a problem.
Okay, great.
What app do you use for that, by the way? I'm curious.
I actually use, because I have an Android phone, everything just got undone in March here. So the one I found that's worked fairly well is Cube ACR. And it has to get to the root of the phone because it was the update that just happened in March, all the apps basically stopped working because they basically block the ability to record on a call. And I'm not sure if that was specific to certain carriers or across the board for Android or what it was. I just know I was impacted by that, so things just stopped working essentially.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
But that being said, so that's actually part of my questions I wanted to talk to you about, and you started to explain that a little bit, was in terms of the retail side, and kind of give you a little background where I think I want to go with this. We will do write-ups with each of our single barrel picks that we do, and we're doing a growing number of them, and then we make those available through retail partners. But I also want, for this too, want to talk a little bit about what you guys see on the horizon in the future. Not necessarily a lot with kind of background and how you guys got started and that kind of thing. I think, that's fairly well out there. Certainly that'll probably be, a little introduction in whatever I put together. But maybe kind of taking that next step and maybe a little more specifics about some of these things that you guys are doing. One of which is, as you talked about before, the experience on the retail side, and the experience with the barrel picks, as you mentioned, was very, very, very different. So you started talking about that. Tell me a little bit more about that and what got you guys from point A to point B of here's how we want our experience to be, and here's why.
Well, good question. I don't know that there's terribly much more to say than what we did, than what I already did. But the notes that we put out, these tasting notes. Look, back when I was doing these, I never wanted notes. Don't give me your notes. Just give me the whiskey and get out of the way. In fact, honestly, at the Party Source, I almost never went to the distillery to do a pick. For one thing, it was long enough ago that they were bowled over, thrilled, happy, the distilleries, that someone wanted to do a pick, and they didn't care if you came there or something. Today, many distilleries, including in a way New Riff, although we're not absolutely dogmatic about it, to constrain somewhat. I know Four Roses does this again. Places require you to come to the distillery. They're not just going to send out samples. And by the way, one reason they don't like to do that so much anymore is it ties up a lot of barrels.
Oh, absolutely.
If you have 100 barrels and you want people to pick private barrels out of them, and you start sending out 4 barrels at a time, what happens? Suddenly you're waiting on people to get back to you, and maybe they take a long time, or they blow you off, or whatever they do. So there is that. I never wanted tasting them. Fine. And I have some sort of our, how do I put it, more evolved or more sophisticated bar, restaurant, retailer clients who are, extraordinarily experienced and bourbon experts. They sometimes pick them at random. Give me that one and that one and that one. I had one retailer in Louisville say, just give me 4 barrels from, let's say, even numbered dates. Okay. 10, 12, 14, 16, like that. That's a great way to randomize what you're tasting. But we wanted to put the notes in there because a lot of people, honestly, are not as sophisticated as that. A lot of people really enjoy the notes and enjoy interacting with them that way. And where, frankly, I was a bit of a skeptic about these notes. It was Ken Lewis's idea. Can we put a note on there? And I said, from my closeted, blinders on sort of view as being an expert whiskey retailer, I said, I never needed the notes, but actually a lot of people do, and I think they have enjoyed. Sorry.
It's okay.
Enjoyed working with the barrels in that fashion. So that's been cool.
And it's a start off point too, because otherwise you're looking at dates and you're looking at barrel numbers. And interestingly, the notes on there, your notes, we did select one that had your notes. I don't know if you'll remember making the note. I'm sure you make a lot of them, but it started with channeling Apollo 11 here. And we'll say that I think that jumped out of the page. There were 5 of us. We each picked one. And I think, honestly, the reason that one was even selected in the group was I think that line just kind of jumped out at the person who, who quite frankly that person who selected had 0 experience, doesn't drink a lot of whiskey. And, we said, well, there's 5 of us, let's each pick one. And, they're all probably going to be varied and good. And that's the one that she picked. So kind of interesting that it was the note that got it number 1 in the group. But then ultimately, because it was blind, which is obviously the best way to do it, it actually still got selected, despite the notes. And I think at that point too, I think people are kind of looking at the notes and saying, I'm not necessarily getting the same thing. I can't tie this one or this one together. However, I know what I like. So you guys are keeping that as best you can, 100% on site. It sounds like you had a couple exceptions to that. Is that really necessary at this point? It seems like it's getting filled up.
You need to come and do a pick.
It's
almost entirely here. Yes.
Yeah.
That we want people to come here and see the distillery and drink the Kool-Aid, and they often, okay, you're a new distillery, one of the craft distilleries, and they think we're a couple of guys in a shed, hammering away on a pot still, and they don't understand the dare I say, the import of New Riff. It's a substantial installation. It's a beautiful building. It's well funded, et cetera, et cetera. So we really want people to come and experience that. But again, it's also down to we simply cannot divvy out the barrels by sending samples away all the time. So there have been, suppose someone was in Owensboro, Kentucky. It's 5+ hours away, and they've already been here. Maybe they've been here twice. Are we willing to send them samples? Maybe, but don't quote me on that. And Yeah, mostly we ask people to come here and taste the stuff.
Yeah. So maybe officially it's on site, with there being exceptions that are based on getting to know somebody over time. How many are you doing per year? What was the number on that?
Honestly, I don't know.
Is that number going up, would you say, or are you kind of trying to keep that more to a limited amount?
Well, it goes up as our production goes up, basically.
Okay.
I mean, we have more barrels in 2019 than we had in 2018, right? And more in 2020 than 2019. So that number will go up a little bit, but at the same time, our footprint expands and we start going to a few more markets and things like that. So I think it will all scale up relatively the same.
And how do you get to those barrels that are going to end up in the single barrel program at this point?
We taste every lot of whiskey. So by which we mean at New Riff, fermenters, and this is an interesting point, really. It's the more important point than other aspects of our single barrel or private barrel program. Most larger distilleries have, so you distill a batch of whiskey, a fermenter full of whiskey. Goes to the still, you get the White Dog, etc. Most places that goes to a ginormous tank, big as your house, and all the whiskey pours into that, and they cut it and they start filling barrels. And by this means the batch to batch, fermenter to fermenter difference. You know, there's a slight difference between each one. This one gets that flavor or that one gets this flavor. Is largely ameliorated and kind of blended away, if you will, which is great for consistency, and that's a very smart way to make whiskey. We happen here to not really be able to do that. Well, we distill a fermenter of whiskey, and it goes to a gauge tank, and that gauge tank is only big enough to hold the output of one fermentation. And that's not absolutely discreetly dogmatically true. We have perhaps you saw on your tour, a beer well. So a fermenter goes to the beer well, and we distill it out of the beer well. It takes about 7-8 hours to go through a whole fermenter in the beer well. Well, we top that beer well off from other fermenters through the day. So there is a small amount of combining or mixing together different fermentations. But there's also, at least in a relative sense, there's a more concrete, discrete line between each fermentation than at many distilleries. The long and short of this is, Nick, that we see a difference not only barrel to barrel, but lot to lot.
Yeah.
And so we always give folks advice when they're picking. I don't pick stuff all from the same lot. I don't care if you really like this note and that note and this flavor. Be sure and pick some from different lots, because we get to see a flavor, not only a difference in flavor, not only barrel to barrel, but lot to lot. So we taste each lot of whiskey, and based on that, we go into that lot or not and pull out some single barrels.
Yeah, that's a good point too, because I've certainly had a number where, every option is basically the same, and that makes it less fun, because the idea of doing it is getting the different flavor profile. Of the group that we had, there was one in particular that was drastically different from the other four, and I know in the past had Blake Reber, if you know him. I'm good friends with him from Bourbonner and Steelbox, and he had done he had actually done a 2-barrel pick I think it was last September, around the Bourbon and Beyond time frame when we got together, and 2 very, very different bottles. I have both of those at home, and that's one of the things that I think excites people about the single barrel process, is that variation and differential, which is exciting about what you guys are doing there. What about thinking about go forward with releases? Saw some different casks in that area and things of that nature. Is there anything on the horizon that you're able to talk about at this point with upcoming releases or upcoming experiments, projects that you guys are working on?
Well, we make 3 what we call main whiskeys, by which I mean we make them every month. Bourbon and rye and malted rye. 100% malted rye grain, right? And we only make 3 fermenters a month of malted rye. We made it very sporadically in the early years, in the early days. At any rate, we make those 3. So the next sort of official, if you will, whiskey to come out will be malted rye. That probably won't hit the market until fall of 2020.
A little ways off. Yeah, I saw that one a little bit. We talked about that one a little bit.
Yeah, we're going to give it a little extra time to age and let it be, a solid 5 years old, not 4, and kind of make a little exclamation point out of it. So that's coming down the pike. And then as well as that, we make, perhaps you appreciated on the tour, how we have the ability to digest different grains.
Yes.
We can dump any bag of grain we want to into the process. Sorry, and that means that, well, for one thing, that's how we make 100% malted rye. We have the ability to go outside of our silos and dump in 2,000-pound bags of whatever grain we want, and in that case, it's malted rye. So we've made a whole bunch of different things. We've made weeded bourbon. We made heirloom grain bourbon. We've made heirloom grain rye. We've made chocolate oatmeal stout bourbon, where we were inspired by our background as brewers, beer lovers, to make a bourbon. So it's mostly corn, but there's oats in it and malted oats and things like that. So those things will come out, I don't know when, but in the future as special limited editions. And for what it's worth, and I don't know if you put this in your write-up or something, but just so you know, those are not accessible for private barrels, and in fact will not be bottled as single barrels, probably. They will just be bottled in bottles.
Gotcha. Do you think all the releases that aren't single barrel will be bottled in bond, or is that a potential change in the future?
No, we will never make anything other than bottled in bond whiskey, and occasionally single barrels that are barrel proof. That's why the single barrel is not bottled in bond, because it's barrel proof.
Right.
We could have made single barrel bonded, but it's a pain in the butt just to cut one barrel.
For one.
And furthermore, clearly we knew people, and we enjoy, we appreciated this in our whiskey lives, and have the option of a barrel proof item. So, no, everything will be bottled and bonded. There's not going to be 90 proof small batch.
Gotcha.
There's no 80 proof easy drink.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate that. I think that speaks to the newer bourbon drinker in a sense.
Right.
And thinking about the size, I know you guys position yourselves really mid. I mean, you're a big craft distillery, but you're a small, large producer. In that mid-range producer. Yeah. So tell me about that.
Some people call it the mid-major.
Right.
That's
Right.
solid,
Right.
We make we're the biggest of the smalls, but the smallest of the bigs. Frankly, I don't even know if we probably don't really consider ourselves a quote-unquote craft distillery. We were definitely inspired by that movement, and we are friends with all those people, and we know them well, we love them, but we are sour mash whiskey producers in full-size barrels for 4 years. Most of what we have done is not the business practices of the small craft distillers, for better or for worse. I think we can agree, sometimes for the better.
Right.
When you have whiskey in a 6-gallon barrel that's 6 months old and they're pushing it out for $50 a half bottle, we're not part of that milieu. That said, we are a mid-major. We make whiskey just like the big boys, but we make a lot less of it. But we're cognizant of how much we do make. We make 8,000 barrels a year, and that's not small potatoes. Another reason why we want people to come here and see in person what we're about. I do underline a little bit the commitment to bottled and bond and why we do it.
Mm-hmm.
We had not agreed, or we didn't plan to do that in the early days. We kicked it around. Should we do bottled bond? And we thought, well, maybe. I mean, we could do a bottled bond. Maybe we should do that. I don't know. We were going to be unchill filtered for a certainty. That went without saying. And that was at least one early quality commitment. And we promised ourselves we would go at least 4 years. If the whiskey wasn't ready at 4, I'd have had to explain to Ken Lewis, we got to go to 5. Happily, it's pretty good at 4. So we were always going to be unchill filtered. But we weren't settled in the early days on bottled and bond. And then internally we started asking ourselves, and we realized, hold on a minute, bottled and bond is not just a category for old men and hipster bartenders. It is the world's highest quality standard for an aged brown spirit. Full stop. The highest quality standard.
Absolutely.
Higher than the standards in Scotland. It's higher than the standards in cognac. You know, they can add caramel color to those spirits, but also in the case of cognac, you can add sugar. You can add oak flavoring. Do you know this?
Right.
Look at Canadian whiskey. You can add any damn thing you want, practically. Japanese whiskey doesn't even have to be distilled in Japan to be called Japanese whiskey. A lot of what's in a bottle of Japanese whiskey, I'm speaking very broadly here, comes from Scotland. Sometimes it comes from America. Anyway, it's the highest standard in the world for any aged brown spirit, and since 1897. So when we realize that, and we say to ourselves, if we really are putting our heart on our sleeves about being quality first, and every single drinks company in the world would tell you they are quality first, and you and I know that's not really the case.
Right.
At some point, the piper gets paid, and the shareholders put out their hands, and the decision gets made. You know?
You don't talk to many about, you don't have many with poor quality in their advertising. It doesn't come up.
That's a good way to put it. Anyway, we realized if we really, really mean that, and we do, if it's really our goal to be, and this is our goal, Ken and I, and we reiterate it to each other all the time, if our goal truly is to be one of the world's great small distilleries, then how can we not only bottle and bond, but make everything pegged to that highest standard in the world?
That makes sense.
You know? And
absolutely.
On top of that, by being unchill filtered, we don't even do the one thing that the federal government allows that you could do. If you parse the bottled and bond regulations very closely, you are allowed to, the only thing you can do to change the whiskey from its native state is to filter it, what they call chill proof it, because you have chill filtered it in a long story short. We don't even do that. So we are taking, the world's highest standard and putting a new riff on that and taking it to an even higher restriction. And with all this kerfuffle about the private barrels and the single barrels and, oh my gosh, you do this, all this so amazing, we love your barrels. For me, the much bigger import is the fact that we bottle everything in bond. Nobody else does that.
Yeah, and if anything, in the way I view the single barrels too, and that's the experience side of it and the introductory side of it. Well, for a certain level of folks, but at the end of the day, it's the main products, and if you don't have main products to stand behind the single barrels, that you're not really going to have a successful single barrel program. It's the interest side of it, more or less, and that experience side of it. How integral was the OKI brand, both from a learning side and how integral was that in the development and bringing new riff to be? Did that inspire it, or was it always the idea to get into the distillation side?
Yeah, good question, and particularly to the point of education or our experience. So the story of OKI was, as Ken Lewis and I were spinning up this distillery, and in the formative days, we were starting the project, I guess. I said to Ken, we should go and buy a few barrels so that we have an aged whiskey to work with now. To work with not in 10 years or even 4 years, but 4, 5, 6 years, but to sell now. And it can be a standard bearer. We didn't make it, but we did bottle it, and we put it together, and we vat it together. And moreover, we make quality decisions that govern how it plays out, namely to be unchill filtered. And to say, this is how we think whiskey ought to be bottled. And it was a standard bearer. It was a little bit of a placeholder, certainly to the point of meeting people in the industry, bars and retailers and restaurants and stuff like that. We did a few picks with various stores and stuff. it was a way to get to know those people. But internally, I don't think I appreciated when I proposed it to Ken how much of a huge learning platform it would be for us. We did some barrel finishes. Now, we haven't done that at New Riff, and we're not likely to do that anytime soon, but we did it, and we learned how to do those. We made a sherry cask finish that, for me, a lover of single malt scotch since the age of 13 years old.
Right.
I love sherry cask stuff. So that was a tremendous learning platform for us, both in the vatting and selecting, but very much also in the bottling, packaging, bartending. We had a great material to work with. And finally, it was not just any old whiskey. To most people, oh, it's an Indiana whiskey, okay, another one of those. I get that. But for us, they are sort of our big brother neighbor distilleries. They're right here in Greater Cincinnati.
Mm-hmm.
They are a high rye distillate. 35% rye was OKI. And we were going to be that as well. And furthermore, we were trained by their emeritus master distiller, Larry Ebersold. He was the master distiller many years there at the Seagram's plant in Lawrenceburg, Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
And he was serving as New Riff consultant. And so we were trained and taught the black arts of how he made whiskey, the 95% rye, his precepts, his quality goals and tricks and the trade and stuff like that. So we were taught to make a whiskey like that, sort of, I wouldn't have wanted barrels of wheated whiskey from Bardstown, for example. It was something right here that attracted us to the Indiana stuff. So OKI was always meant to die. It was not intended to persist as a brand. Perhaps if the supply of aged whiskey had been available later in our careers, we would have continued it. But the fact is, it was not available. That whole market dried up. You couldn't go and get 5, 6, 8, 10-year-old whiskey anymore. And we always intended for OKI to die. What we were not going to do is do the switcheroo where Indiana juice is in the bottle and then suddenly Kentucky juice is in the bottle. We wanted it to be a clean break and a different design.
And I'd say that's against the norm right now, because I think we are seeing a lot that are seeing both, blending both. It's moving from one to the next. That's becoming more of the common trend. Whereas you guys decided to keep the OKI brand very much distinct and different from the New Riff brand. Do you think we'll ever see something that references back to it in New Riff packaging? Never say never.
I don't know. Right, right now we just want to focus on New Riff, I guess.
Yeah. So, anything else with that too on the retail side and the retail experience, or from that perspective of working the market in the opposite direction? Was that a learning curve at all, or had you already pretty much had that side figured out of getting through distribution and the whole retail channel and that kind of a thing?
Well, I guess we are, compared to many distilleries, I mean, I go to the craft distilling conferences, and you see people there look like deer caught in the headlight and not really knowing the industry. And Ken and I did know the industry. We had lots and lots of contacts and friends, and came into this with much more experience maybe than many first-time whiskey makers, etc. We believe in the ability of retailers to build brands, not only or primarily on premise. So to a certain extent, our focus has been a little more retail than it has been the bar. Or to put it another way, we don't necessarily go to a market and think, all right, how do we get them to choose New Riff in cocktails? That's how you build a brand. And we believe retailers are quite capable of building brands as well, and so that's been a little more of a focus. I guess we continue to learn. I mean, we're looking at, do we export something? So there's certainly things out there that we don't understand yet and need to learn about.
Sure, always, right? That's the sign of an open mind, I suppose. So go forward for New Riff. What's on the more immediate horizon? What's on the long-term horizon? What might we expect New Riff to look like in 10 or 20 years from now, all things going as you guys kind of envision them today?
Well, I don't think I can say really with accuracy, Nick, but I would say that we do hold back 20 to 30% of our output every year to become older. That's still not a lot. 20% or 30% of what we made 4 years ago, or in 2015, years from now, still is not a lot of whiskey. I hear from folks a lot, I can't wait until it gets older. And it will get older. There will be older, I don't know how old, 7 years, 10, 8, I don't know. But there won't be a lot of it. So I hope that by, 10 or 20 years from now, we have simply more whiskey to share with the world. And furthermore, maybe more whiskey to share with the world. What is the percent? Well, right now we have bourbon and rye. What does malted rye do? What do our specialty, as we call them for want of a better term, the specialty whiskeys do? What is the perception of our version of wheated bourbon? And I'm not necessarily saying it to catch me out, but we have the opportunity to change perceptions in the future with other risks, if you will, that we will do.
Gotcha. And you don't have any plans to become, or ideas to become larger on a scale of, let's open another distillation location or something of that nature? I know there's another warehouse that's in the works, at least, as we toured the warehouses, and we're speaking about that. But from a distillation and production standpoint, would you grow into demand that do you think, or do you think you'd want to keep it in the tighter kind of way you have it right now?
One thing I can say with certainty is we're going to remain independent. As we're in this business now, and I start to work inside the bourbon industry in a totally different way than we did when we were retailers, you can start to see different people's business models, and these are all good. No criticism of anybody. They're all viable ways to do your business, what have you. But I can see places making decisions for an eventual outcome. And
sure.
Sometimes that outcome is to remain independent, and often that outcome is to someday be bought up.
Absolutely, yeah.
To someone. And I can look at someone now and see that they're making decisions to do one or the other. There's nothing wrong with that. But if it was Tim Lewis's intention to get bought up someday, he's doing it wrong.
Right.
We are not doing the kinds of things, putting the money where the mouth is, that would lead us to be to be bought up. We are making decisions that are for long-term independence and quality, and so that I can say with a certainty is what you will see in 10 or 20 years. Will we be owned in 10 or 20 years by, take your pick of, Diageo, Sazerac, William Grant, Brown-Forman, Brandy? No, we're not going to be sold. I don't know that we would ever expand with another distillery. It's doubtful. We take the view of not wanting to get too big. One thing we are not really concerned about is the very thing that all these big companies are concerned about, which is two words. The words are market share. Market share. What's our market share in San Francisco? How are we doing in London? What's our market share? We don't really care about that. We don't have stockholders. We don't have shares out there. We have one brilliant owner who's a fantastic guy to work with. How you hear of such and so entrepreneur is just the most amazing boss to work for, but it's never your boss?
Right.
Well, Nick, it is my boss. Working with Ken Lewis is tremendous, and that's not going to go away. So we don't need to get really big. Our goal here is not to get rich. We'll have nice lives and we'll make our money and we'll be successful, but the point is not to gain market share. The point is to be a great small distillery.
Do you find,
if you think about it, is an amorphous goal. How do you know that you've made it?
Right.
What do you do every day to get there? If your goal is market share, it's simple. You need to sell more booze. But that's not the case when your stated goal that you remind yourselves in every meeting every week is to become a great small distillery of the world and to do it in sour mash Kentucky whiskey. If that's the goal, how do you go about it? How do you know that you do it? You just have to keep putting one foot in front of the other with confidence and skill and commitment to quality, and that's what we're going. I'm sorry that sounds corny, but it's the truth.
No, it's interesting that 2 points on that. The first is I was actually listening to a podcast on the flight home on Saturday, and the point the person made was he measured success by the point at which you could lose all your money and still be happy in that sense, and I thought that was interesting. The other point being that the way we've developed our Breaking Bourbon, our website, it's 3 of us, and it's only 3 of us, has been that same kind of perspective. We've never engaged in, a lot of those easy money grabs and those kind of things, and that's, I think, helped us gain the popularity, and now we respect that, and now we do everything we can to make sure that our content that we're pulling forward is as truthful and accurate and honest and that kind of thing as it possibly can, and we think about, would we ever sell if someone even were to ask us, to make an offer, and we think about would it be because it's become such an ingrained part of our lives, talking about this kind of thing, talking with folks like you, visiting distilleries, talking with everybody about it, it would kind of be a piece that would be missing, should you remove that, even if it was a chunk of money that was given in return. So I think that's interesting. Do you come across many other distillers that you find share that same type of approach, or would you say that's fairly rare?
I'd say it's fairly rare, I guess, but there's certainly, we know who the great distilleries of the world, great small distilleries of the world are out there. We sold them for many years at the Party Source. Many of them international, but there certainly are some in America as well. It is a rare thing to wish to stay independent and relatively small, I suppose. That goes for almost any industry, right?
Sure. So what gets you out of bed and motivated on a day-to-day basis doing what you do?
I don't know. A lot of it's the team we have here. I'd be happy if we make whiskey here. I would be happy to make widgets if I could make them with this group.
That's cool. That's good. And I noted too, a lot of the crew does not come from necessarily a whiskey background. Was that accidental, or was that deliberate for some reason?
Mostly that was deliberate. We talking to Larry Ebersold, because first of all we needed a consultant, a master distiller to teach us what to do.
Sure.
Ken and I had a lifetime of knowledge and learning about alcoholic beverages and spirits, but I'd never made them before. I wish I could tell you, I had a still in my dorm room, man. You know what? I never did that. I never owned an illicit still.
Right.
And so when we opened the New Riff, all of us put together had made 0 whiskey, 0 in a spirit of any kind. Larry's advice was, and Ken and I felt this way too, we didn't necessarily want to just recruit someone out of the Kentucky industry who would come in with a lot of perhaps good preconceptions and foreknowledge and assumptions and practices. That might have been just fine, but it was Larry's advice that said you might just think about hiring a brewer. Hire someone who knows fermentation, because that's where the flavor is made. You don't make flavor in a still. Stills don't make flavor. Stills can, depending on the use of them and everything, they can shape flavor, but they don't create the flavor. And the flavor is all made in the fermenter. And so we were looking, in fact, to hire a brewer, and we wound up with Brian Sprance, our head distiller and production manager. Brilliant guy, came to us out of the craft beer industry. He was probably a master level brewer, more or less, at Boston Beer. And came to work for us, and he had not distilled a lick of whiskey in his life. He didn't know anything about making whiskey, but he knew all about fermentation. And having then been trained to run the distillery by Larry, that was very much a deliberate act, that we didn't just hire someone. We wanted to find our whiskey, find it ourselves, so to speak.
And find a team that wanted to share that similar vision, and that makes all the difference in the world. Well, unless I didn't ask you something that you think I should have, or anything else that you think we missed that you'd like to share.
Something I've been harping on lately or reminding people about is how you drink New Riff. Now, I've been saying, for 20 years, drink your whiskey any way you want, just buy it from me. But we appreciate when people take the moment to add a drop of water to our whiskey, whether it's barrel proof or bonded, because we have really designed New Riff whiskeys to have a splash of water. They are unchill filtered, and they're high proof. And I read comments sometimes, it was a little hot for 100 proof. Well, did you add water? Would you consider that? If you will take the time to add just a splash of water to a New Riff whiskey, or to any unchill filtered whiskey, you will see that additional flavors and aromas and everything come out of it with that water. And if you won't do that, that's all well and good. Buy it for me, like I said,
Right.
But you are literally leaving some flavor on the table over what the experience could be. And I exhort folks to add a little bit of water. I do that in my tastings all the time, is throw a little water in there. And I hope that more people would do that, particularly when evaluating the whiskey. It's all well and good to drink it straight, but what really is in that bottle, what's really in that sample? There's more to it than meets the eye. It's the only way you'll drink it is straight.
Good point. Good point. Actually, another thing I thought of, you guys are currently sourcing your malt from Germany, correct? Or at least the majority of it?
No, our rye comes from Europe.
The rye comes from Europe.
A company
Gotcha.
named Brooks Rye. Brooks Grain.
Gotcha.
Brooks. And they are the leading supplier, the primary supplier of rye to the whole whiskey industry. And the particular supply that we get is their best grade of rye. It's quite surely the finest rye supplied to the bourbon industry. And it is specifically suited for things like the 95% rye recipe.
Gotcha.
And it comes from Europe. It's a commodity grain, so it comes from various places, often Sweden, but it could be Germany, Denmark, Sweden, maybe Poland sometimes, Northern Europe.
Yeah, it's 95% rye, 5% malted rye, correct?
That's right.
Right.
That's right. The malted rye we get does come from Germany, that we put in the rye and that we make 100% malted rye whiskey from. There simply is not enough supply of malted rye in America to get enough malted rye to satisfy us. In fact, I could be mistaken, but I believe we are the largest, from the company that we buy the malted rye from, we are by quite a wide margin their biggest buyer of malted rye.
Wow. Interesting.
Because most of it gets sold to breweries, and they use 5%
Right.
in a Rogan beer or something like that. Nobody's out there making 8,000 pounds 3 times a month of malted rye.
Is that the reason for the introduction of the malted rye? Because the brewer experience at New Riff?
Pardon me.
Sure.
No, the story of the malted rye is we asked Larry Ebersol. We said to him one day, Master, because that's what we call him.
Right.
What was your favorite whiskey? What was the best whiskey you ever made at Seagram's? And he said it was that 100% malted rye.
Okay.
Once in a while, they would have the opportunity there to make 100% malted rye. That was Larry's favorite always. So we investigated that, and in a bit of an homage to him, we tried 100% malted rye, and it's really special stuff. It is, you'll taste it someday.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
It's different than malted rye. When I went into it, we started making this, and there were precious few 100% malted rye whiskeys on the market. The only one I really had a reference point for was Old Potrero. You know that whiskey from San Francisco?
Haven't had it.
Made by today it's called Hodling, but it was made by the Anchor Distilling Company, Anchor Steam. And so that was about the only malt. And it's a cool whiskey, but it's not a parallel example to what we would be doing. It's not sour mash, et cetera, et cetera. So I didn't really know what to expect from malted rye, and I thought, well, if rye is spicy, maybe malted rye is like super spicy, and it's actually not. It is elegant.
Yeah, the opposite almost.
Subtle, finely structured. It really is a lesson in what happens when you malt a grain. When you malt a grain, a lot of things happen, but in one way of looking at it, you improve the quality of the grain. The flavors become perhaps more evocative, and it's elegant, it's graceful, not super. It is spicy, but it's different than the standard rye. And what I learned was, it almost makes more sense, this malted rye whiskey, if you think about it as a malt whiskey first, rather than a rye whiskey. And it has some of the pairing of malt Scotch whiskeys, although the set of flavors is totally different because of new charred oak barrels and because it's rye and spicy and things like that.
Right, right.
So that was where we came to even make that in the first place.
Is there going to be a pretty small amount of that once it does release?
Well, yeah, we make. We will. There's probably something in the far off future, like a quarterly release of it.
Gotcha. I'm looking forward to that one. Well, good. No, hey, I appreciate you taking the time this morning to speak with me about this. Appreciate the experience that we had on Saturday, and yeah, anything you feel like you wanted to share and forgot to, feel free to shoot me an email after the call, and I, like I said again, I appreciate your time.
Sure, happy to help, Nick.
Very good. Thank you, Jay.
You bet.
Yep.
Keep up the good work.
Thank you. Yep. Take
Bye-bye.
care. Yep. Bye-bye.